Welcome to Royal Ascot Day 1, and it's Andrew Hawkins here chatting with Candice Hare from TVG about all the action coming up from Ascot. And Candice, you and I have known each other for a while, but it's going to be a Royal Ascot like no other.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, you've obviously been there. I haven't even been there, but I know just from watching at home, having always seen it packed from top to bottom with fans and with media and obviously with the royal family as well. To have none of that, it's going to be very interesting to watch, but we have great racing nonetheless.
I guess the thing as well, though, is that for us in the States, in Australia, it's always been all about the racing, and we do get some great racing coming up, those normal 30 races, plus also 6 handicaps, which I know you'll be loving as well.
I'm going to try my best. For some crazy reason, I seem to do well in the handicaps. I don't know what it is, but we're hoping to keep the streak alive this year.
Well, we start with a handicap coming up. It's coming up at 10:15 Australian time or Sydney time. So what would that? That'd be about 5:15 a.m. over there in LA. Is that right?
Very early, yes. Luckily, we have our man, Scott Hazelton, on the coverage for TVG, but we're recording at 8:30 here in California, and he might already be asleep because it's going to be an early morning for everyone.
Well, he's going to be having a few early mornings to come. They're late nights here for us in Sydney, but it is the Buckingham Palace Handicap. Normally we start with the Queen Anne, but that's coming up as race 2. The Buckingham Palace Handicap, it hasn't been a race at Royal Ascot for the last 5 years. It was replaced by the Commonwealth Cup. Favourite here is Darrick for John Gosden, Frankie Dettori. Interestingly, Sheikh Hamdan and Shadwell, they have 3 of the first 4 favourites, all 4-year-olds, all horses that look to be quite progressive, Candice.
Yeah, I think that's the name of the game in this race and a couple of the handicaps. It's a bit different from what we're accustomed to seeing because you have horses who maybe have not been able to race in spots that they would have previously had expected at the end of last year. And so now they're just trying to find spots to run, I think, to some degree. And in this race in particular, I think you're right. You have to kind of find that balance between who are the horses who are best suited by the handicap, by the weight that they have in here, and who maybe are the best horses, because I don't think those two answers are necessarily the same.
So which way are you looking in here? As you say, it is a pretty open race and plenty of horses on an upward spiral.
There is. I'm looking to a bit of an older horse by the name of Cliffs of Capri. You see him there as the number 22 for Jamie Osborne, a son of Canford Cliffs, who has what I'm going to be looking for the entire meeting. Anybody who's watched me on air in America in the last several weeks has heard me really preach wanting to find horses who have recency, because for us here in the States, much like over there in Britain, the bulk of our racing was shut down. You have a lot of horses coming back off of layoffs, and what I've found is that unless you have a horse who's just way better than this group, or a race where nobody's raced recently, it's the horses who have recency on their side who have really put forth the best performances. Even if they were racing against lesser company, it hasn't really seemed to matter. Just having that race makes a world of a difference. This is a horse who raced over at Newmarket on the 4th of June. He finished second over 7 furlongs that day. I thought it was a good comeback performance, and his record here at Ascot is pretty impeccable as well. So I see Jamie Osborne, who might be the best Twitter follow among the British trainers on the board, right off the bat at Ascot, and hopefully we can get a nice price already from Cliffs of Capri.
Any concern about the outside gate there for Cliffs of Capri?
Not a ton. I think this is a horse who's pretty tractable, to be perfectly honest with you. So if I was going to have somebody who had a draw that maybe was typically a bit concerning, he isn't one that would draw my eye in that direction. I think he'll be able to slot in here just fine.
I'm going for one here at a bit of a bigger price. In fact, you have to go all the way down to number 17, Documenting, 30-1 currently. You talked about Cliffs of Capri being a bit older. Well, Documenting is a year older than him. I just like with Documenting that he has been running well in races on the all-weather. His racing post ratings are quite a bit higher on the all-weather surfaces compared to the turf, but he does actually have some nice little turf bits of form in there, including a second to Kaying Star, who we've seen go on and perform quite nicely in Hong Kong. I just get the feeling that Documenting, he looks like he's well handicapped here, and it just wouldn't surprise me to see him take a step forward, especially given, as you say, a lot of these coming into it first up. It's going to be an interesting race to see how it develops. It does look like it will develop down the stand side, and I do think that Documenting might end up in the right spot. But look, plenty of chances here, and that's how you like to see these handicaps at Royal Ascot. We move on to race 2. This is the traditional opener. That is the Queen Anne Stakes, the Group 1 Queen Anne coming up over a mile. It's an interesting group of milers at the moment. I think it's a stronger group than it was, say, 12 months ago, Candice. But at this stage, you still just don't know how some of these horses are going to measure up against horses that have done it, like Circus Maximus.
Most definitely. I think I've been pretty open over not even just the last 12 months, but maybe the last 2 years, that the mile group out there in Britain has not been strong. I think it's why, in the past couple of years, we've seen horses who we wouldn't normally expect to win a Queen Anne be able to get the job done, just because it's been such a wide open group. But for me, I wound up going to Terabellum, who comes in here for John Gosden and Godolphin. I was quite taken by her performance in the Dahlia back at Newmarket in the earlier part of June. I guess a little bit over a week ago. It's weird to see so many horses coming back so quickly, but it is just a caveat of this season. But I thought she was very good on that occasion. She defeated Queen Power, who of course comes back in here once again. She's going to be short, but I think it's deserved. This is a mare who's looked progressive for quite some time, and I think this year perhaps might be the time we see the best of her. But I'm with you on that line of thinking, that I think the way to maybe look at this race is look to kind of the new kids on the block. I think they maybe possess a little bit more strength than what some of the older horses have had to deal with lately.
Well, I said that, and then I ended up going with one of the older brigade in Mustachery. I just can't believe the price about Mustachery, given that he was almost a favourite last year. He didn't fire over the final furlong. He did seem to really struggle in that final furlong against Lord Glitters last year, but he was coming off a big win over Lawrence in the Lock-in Stakes, and I just get the feeling that this time, coming into it fresh, I think he might be well suited. He does need things to suit, and that's always a bit of a query, but I think Mustachery looks a bit of a big price there. The other horse I do just want to mention, well, there's a couple of others. I think Bilsden Brook is a big price as well. I expect her to run well. She's the type who always seems to step up when you least expect it. And for Australians as well, Plumatic, well worth watching, racing in some very famous colours, the Jayco colours there of Jerry Ryan. He's likely to come down for a Cox Plate, so Plumatic, one to watch. But yep, for me,
you led me down a road. You led me down a road of thinking we're on the same page. We like the younger ones, and then you just completely diverted that and went a totally different direction.
I'm sorry. I know I promised a lot and failed to deliver, but what can we do? I had to go with Mustachery, but it is an open race. As I say, I do think that if you look at this race in 12 months' time, I think it will shape up better than what we've seen 12 months on from that Lord Glitters accidental agent sort of form coming from the last couple of years. And so we're going to move on now to the third. That is the Ribblesdale. Now, it's interesting as well because obviously we're used to the Ribblesdale and also the King Edward the 7th being later in the week. They're races that are generally afterthoughts or stepping stones to the Irish Classics, but this year they're actually stepping stones to the English Classics with the Derby and the Oaks coming up in about 3 weeks or so. So it's a different Ribblesdale this year. Favourite at the moment, Frankly Darling. John Gosden expected to have a flying first day according to the betting markets. Frankly Darling coming off that big win first up is your favourite ahead of Trefoil, Passion and Miss Yoda.
It's one of those things. I understand the appeal for Frankly Darling. You can't really knock anything in her short but very nice resume that we've seen of her thus far. Regally bred as well for Top Connections. My concern I have about her at a very short price, though, is that with her 2 starts, we saw her once race over very soft ground, and then she won on the all-weather. Those are 2 surfaces that tend to correlate to each other. And if there's one thing that I found, for covering racing in Australia, and I'm sure you've seen some of the same, there are quite a few Frankles down there, and I've mentioned a few times on air that they've really shown a surprising prowess for the wet ground, maybe taking that a bit more from Galileo than from Frankel himself, but many of them have loved it. So until I see her race over ground similar to what she's going to get this week, which is going to be good, then I don't want to go for her at a very, very short price. She might make me look silly, and I'm willing to stick with that, though, because she's 6-4. That's very short. You have to have, no concerns at all about a horse at that price. So I opted instead to go to Miss Yoda. I liked her performance over at Lingfield last out. She's proven over good ground in the past, and I think she's kind of been tracking under the radar, to be perfectly honest. This is another filly who has done very, very little wrong, and I don't see any issue with the step up and trip, even here at a testing location like Ascot. So 11-2 for Miss Yoda. I can get aboard that price, and it's a horse who seems to be heading in the right direction, but maybe with not the flash of a horse like Frankly Darling.
I think you've got the right form race for mine. I think that Lingfield Oaks trial is the race that I'm looking towards, but I'm actually looking towards West End Girl, who finished third there. I'm hoping that Gosden, Dettori, and Oppenheimer, who had Golden Horn, well, West End Girl is a daughter of Golden Horn, so I'm hoping that it comes back to bite them a little bit here in the Ribblesdale. I just loved her run there. I loved her stepping up and trip. She did tail off at the end of her 2-year-old campaign, but it was a promising run at Lingfield. I get the feeling that she can take another step forward. Interestingly, was also sold earlier in the week, sold through the first Tattersalls online sale, going for 420,000 guineas to clients of Badger's Bloodstock. So I think that West End Girl for mine is a big price here. That said, it is a very open Ribblesdale, and I think that those who are looking to play trends and things that have happened in the past, I think the trends have to go out the window for these two races, the Ribblesdale and the King Edward VII, because simply they're not going to hold up, really. If we look at everything that's happened, it's just such a different year that I think you really have to be looking outside the box.
I totally agree. I think these are two different races than we've really ever seen them become, just because of the timing and what little racing we've had leading up to them.
And so we'll move on to race 4, the King Edward VII Stakes. Again, 1.5 miles, this one for the 3-year-old colts and geldings. Aidan O'Brien with a really strong hand here in Mogul at the top of the market, obviously very well related, being the brother to Japan, Sir Isaac Newton, half brother to Morris, and a good performer at 2. Mohican Heights, 2 from 2, the son of Australia. And Arthur's Kingdom is there at 5-1 as well. Frankie Dettori taking a rare ride for Coolmore here. So some really nice types here, Candice. Which way did you go?
I wound up going with the pedigree a bit. You mentioned the top pedigree for Mogul being related to Japan, Sir Isaac Newton's Secret Gesture, who we saw here in North America, as well as Morris. One thing you have to note about them, though, for as classy as that of a pedigree that is, pretty much all of them, their best distance was right there around that 1 mile 2 mark. So going 1 mile 4 here is interesting. And I wonder if they put Mogul in this spot because they thought the further distance would result in a softer race potentially than over a shorter trip. He was very good at 2. No concerns with him there, but I just thought that maybe his stablemate might get the best of him over this longer trip. Arthur's Kingdom is a brother to Joshua Tree, who I would normally say we know here in America, but I think the entire world knows Joshua Tree. He feels like he raced just about everywhere, and he wanted this further distance, and I think we've seen that in the racing to date from Arthur's Kingdom as well. So I'm looking for him to really relish this step up and trip more than his stablemate and hopefully pull off the very mild upset.
I had to agree. I actually thought Arthur's Kingdom, I really liked that run at Saint-Cloud at his last start as a 2-year-old. For me, what really interests me with Arthur's Kingdom is getting back onto that firmer surface. You think being a Camelot probably would prefer a bit of give in the ground, but I just get the feeling that he just found that heavy track that he struck at his last 2 starts quite testing. And I didn't want to see him on that sort of a track getting up to 1 mile and 4. So I think that he's going to be right in the mix. Frankie Dettori, very good on horses that will race near the speed. I think Frankie, if he can get across to the lead or just outside the leader, he should be able to rate him perfectly. I think he's going to have first run on Mogul. And for mine, Arthur's Kingdom, the one to beat here. So we do finally agree on something. Who'd have thought?
Finally.
It was a long time coming, and I'm sure that there'll be more to come during the week. But we'll move on to the 5th, the second of the Group 1 races coming up in at Royal Ascot day 1. And it is the Kingstand Stakes coming up over the 5 furlongs. Look, Batash, obviously the market leader. Getting out in the market though, 5 to 6. It'll be interesting to see if he ends up striking even money. Glass Slippers has had her supporters. Liberty Beach, the 3-year-old, also in single figures. Equilateral by the market is the only other real contender. Candice, how do you see this shaping up?
Obviously, I understand the appeal to most for Batash. They're looking at this race as like, well, Blue Point isn't here, and so nobody's as good as Blue Point was, and so you take him out, and here we have Batash. But it's just so rough with me with him. He's never been a horse who's been particularly straightforward. When you look at a couple of his races on flatter tracks, I think that he runs out better and is able to win by further margins. But oftentimes over these undulating courses, I don't know if the trip sees him out just a little bit, or maybe he's striking some tougher races, but he's just never been a horse who has made it look easy for mine. And so at a short price, again, he's been away for a while. I just thought this was a race where you could potentially kind of throw out a big flyer and you might be able to get the job done, because I don't see anybody winning this race by an enormous margin. For me, I was very intrigued at a large price by the 10 Shades of Blue for Clive Cox.
Really?
This is absolutely. This is a 4-year-old who has not raced that many times considering her age. It feels like her form here at Ascot is impeccable. She broke her maiden here over the 5 furlongs. She was third in the Queen Mary in what was a 3-way photo finish, essentially, where Senora Camballo was able to get the victory. Last year, she was a bit all over the place, but I thought she got it together at the end of the year. She was beaten just a short neck over by Glass Slippers, who's the second choice in this year's race. Then she went over very soft ground that she hated. And then she came back this year and broke super slow in her first up effort. So I think the excuses are there. The blinkers go on for the first time today. So at 33 to 1, I'm very much in the camp of Shades of Blue. I think this is a race where either you have to go with Batash or you just kind of have to go with a long shot, because for mine, it's the horses like Glass Slippers, your second, third choices who are the real underlays.
Well, look, I agree with you that Glass Slippers is an underlay. I think that when you look at the form, I think a lot's being made of that win in the Prix de l'Abbaye when she struck ground to suit. I think if you look at the form before that, for mine, I definitely think she's an underlay. Interesting Shades of Blue. I think that from memory, well, Clive Cox had Profitable, who won this race. So Clive Cox looking for a second King's Stand Stakes. But you say the third is an underlay, the third favourite, Liberty Beach. For mine, she's actually an overlay. I think that Liberty Beach looks a tremendous price here. Again, similar to Shades of Blue, ran in the Queen Mary as a 2-year-old, finished 4th behind Raffle Prize last year. It was a good race. Kamari was in there as well. I just get the feeling Liberty Beach at the 1,000 metres, that's her trip. She's won over the 1,200 metres, the 6 furlongs, first time out this season. But I think back to the 1,000 metres, the 5 furlongs, she's going to be much better suited. And I also just think that with that weight swing that she gets at weight for age, she looks well suited. So for mine, Liberty Beach is the one here. But I'm glad to see we're both taking on Batash. Actually, interesting question.
We both have ladies.
Well, we do, exactly. You know, got to stick with those flying fillies. No, question for you, though. Dave Stanley this morning on Sky Sports Radio asked me how I thought Batash would go in an Everest. Now, I said he'd be suited by a flat track, which I know you mentioned there. I think the flat track is a plus, but I said that any year that Nature Strip's in there, Batash wouldn't be suited because Batash would just struggle for that early toe against a horse like Nature Strip. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
100%. I completely agree. And I don't even think it's just Nature Strip. I think it's just the speed that you find in Australia in general. Had it been previous years, maybe even the first 2 years where Redzel was able to win, I think Batash would have struggled as well, because Redzel was that type of horse that really put through fast middle sectionals. I don't think Nature Strip is inherently different either. I think a lot of people look at both of those horses as fast early, but what kills horses who race against them is what they do in the middle portion of the race, where they really kick it into high gear and you get horses chasing and off the bit. And I completely agree. I think that's exactly what would happen to Batash. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a suitable race for him. I think, to be frank, the races where he's best suited often are over in France. I think those are the races where he often has a speed advantage that he's able to work in his favor.
I think you're right there. I think he's more likely to be seen in the Abbaye than in an Everest, that's for sure. But we'll move on to the 6th. This race coming up at 10 past 4 there in the UK. So it's going to be 1 a.m. Australian time, at least a little bit better for you, just after 8 a.m.
I will
there
be
in
awake. I will have maybe had
California.
half a coffee. I'm starting to get with it at this time of the day.
Oh, well, you'll be doing better than I am, I'm sure. Favourite here for the Duke of Cambridge coming up over the mile, the Group 2 event for the fillies and the mares. It is Jubiloso, and she has had support, although she has drifted out again. Last time I'd seen she had been wound into 5-2, but she's back out to 11-4. So the 5 Jubiloso, your favourite, ahead of the 8 Nazif. 10 Queen Power, who you did mention in when talking about Terra Bellum. And also the 6 Lavender's Blue there at 6-1. The 7 Miss O'Connor yet to taste defeat at 7-1. So a very competitive race. Which way did you side?
Well, we hadn't mentioned too many horses from Team France, but that's the way that I'm going in this one with the 11 Wazamia for the Graffard Barn. Alshikab Racing owned this daughter of Tornado. And again, very lightly raced, just, newly turned 4 years old. She's only had a handful of races under her belt. But I think France maybe potentially will have a better Royal Ascot than they have had in the last couple of years because they opened up and started racing earlier. So more horses who do have that fitness on their side. And this is one of them. We saw her back in May over at Longchamp. She finished second in her most recent event, the Prix Maurice Zilbet behind Spinning Memories. I thought she ran good that day. It was nice to see because her more recent performance at the end of last year I felt was very disappointing behind One Master from what we had seen of her to date. So to see her bounce back in that way, I think is a big positive. For her to have the race under her belt is another positive as well. And I think this is a very progressive filly who maybe hasn't gotten enough attention because of horses like Jubiloso who have the pedigree. But I'll be honest, I've struggled to be taken with her, not because the talent isn't there. It's very obvious that it is, but she is, at least last year, I felt like she was very much lacking mentally in the progression we need to see from her to win at the higher levels. Now she's been away. She's with one of the best trainers on the planet. So potentially that has changed during the off season. But I thought from what I saw from Jubiloso last year, we needed her to be a lot more professional to win in some of these bigger races. So I opted to go to Wazmia, who's shown me a bit more of those professional qualities in her career.
So then I must admit that I did it. I went Jubiloso, and I don't know.
No.
I know. I knew you were going to say that. I'm still hurting from the Goodwood run where she finished behind Bills and Brooks. She should have won that day. I don't think that was actually any fault of the horse. I was very critical about Ryan Moore's ride there, and I stand by that. I think
He must be pleased that he's on her again.
Well, yes, exactly. Look, I think that in terms of talent, she's the most talented horse in this field. And yes. I think you mentioned, I think you're right in saying that she needs to have shown that maturity going from 3 to 4. But again, from this yard, with that sort of pedigree, I'd expect her to make that step forward. I think she can. She needs to. But I think it's going to be a case of if she has taken that step forward, she should be way too good, and I think that we'll be wondering how they offered 11-4. If she hasn't, we'll be wondering why we stepped into that 11-4.
Well, you might be wondering.
Oh, I know I'm crazy, but look, I'd actually written down when I was doing my piece yesterday for ANZ Bloodstock News. I wrote down Lavender's Blue. Was going Lavender's Blue, and then I just thought I'm going to be kicking myself if Jubiloso wins, and I'm not on her, especially given that I believe that that Raw Racing Post rating, even having been adjusted for this race, I still think she's capable of achieving so much more. So for mine, I have to stick. It is sort of a heart versus head decision, and in the end, the heart won out, which for me never really turns out that well.
No.
So look, we'll see how we go. But I mean, it is an open race, though, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, it's going to be an open meeting. I feel like we're going to say that each and every race every day just because there's so much less information that we have at our disposal than earlier. And so I think if there's one thing people are seeing, I'm picking a lot of prices, and a lot of that is just because there's more uncertainty that you're dealing with from a wagering perspective. So if you have more uncertainty, then I want bigger prices about everybody.
Okay, that seems fair enough. I think you may as well be chasing those bigger prices. If you're ever going to do it, Royal Ascot's the time. And as you say, this year of all years, it's worthwhile as well. We close out the card with the Ascot Stakes. the traditional closer on day one. This coming up over the 2 miles, 4 furlongs, or the 4,000 metres. Favourite is Verdana Blue for Nicky Henderson. Ryan Moore, a good record in this race. Currently 9-2 favourite, ahead of Moon King at 7-1. And then you get out to Land of Oz, 8-1. They're the three in single figures. How did you see this one shaping up, Candice?
This was very difficult. By far the most difficult race of the day, perhaps not a surprise. Oftentimes you're looking to some of those dual purpose horses in a race of this nature when you're going this type of a distance. But I'm going to go with the horse who's been racing on the flat, and that might be to my dismay. But I like Summer Moon in here a fair bit. The son of See the Moon comes in for trainer Mark Johnston. He was third in the Cesaro, which last year out at Newmarket. Obviously, we're dealing with a far different story from a weight perspective on this occasion. He carried 8 stone 5 that day. I believe he's carrying 9 stone 9 in here. So he's going to have to overcome the much larger weight. But at least he's been gelded. He's been gelded in the off season. So we haven't seen him yet this year. But there's reason to feel like potential improvement is there. I know the word gelding might make you shudder. I don't know if you'll be able to speak after this, but I think that's what he needed. I think he was a horse who lacked a little bit of focus. So we chopped those balls off, and we hope that he will be much more he'll have his head in the game a bit more, and 10-1 seems quite fair.
I think you're making every man cringe who's listening to this. You're brutal.
Do what I can. I just want winners. We'll do it however we have to.
Well, that's true. I'm actually going the way of Coeur de Lion for Toro Hammer Hansen and Alan King. Coeur de Lion won the Chester Cup last year. It was a very wet track, but ran well. Just gave out in the final stages in this race last year, finishing about 8 lengths behind the Grand Vizier. I feel like he's well handicapped at the moment, and that's the reason I've gone for him. But look, it is a very open race. Verdana Blue, they were once talked about as a Melbourne Cup contender. Land of Oz looks a potentially progressive type. Summer Moon, you've made some good cases there. So there are many ways you can go. The one thing that I found really interesting is that the last 10 winners all had started over hurdles. So that takes out horses like Land of Oz, but makes a big case for a horse like Verdana Blue, who obviously was a Grade 1 winner of the Christmas hurdle, beating Bouveau Dare.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We always have kind of drilled into our heads that those are the types that you look in here. So I don't know. I'm going against the trends, but hopefully it means that we'll get a better price. Again, I would emphasize to people that I think that is the real goal of the day, to know that you have more uncertainty that you're dealing with from any Royal Ascot meeting probably ever. And so any horse you like, just make sure you demand a little bit of a bigger price than you normally would, because we just don't know. Many of these horses we haven't seen in nearly 8 months.
It's pretty scary when you think about that what's happened in those 8 months since we've last seen them. I mean, you think back to Champions Day back in October, and you just never would have thought that we'd be in a position where the world would change so much in the months since, but just in particular with racing, that the preparations would have been so different leading into the 2020 season.
100%. And I think that's, for me, that's what I've been seeing everywhere. Here in America, we've had a couple more tracks open up recently, and it's been horses who have raced at tracks like Fawner Park that stayed open against far lesser company than what they're against now. They've been winning just because they have the recency. I saw a lot of the same when I covered racing over Tasmania just the other day as well. Horses who maybe were purchased who had raced on the mainland before coming over, or there was a couple who had even gone over there and came back. Those were the horses who were winning. Even if they ran last, just having that race, it means a world of a difference.
We'll chat about that tomorrow. I think that's going to become really crucial with a horse like Adayab in the Prince of Wales Stakes, having had the Australian Autumn to race when, others were sitting in a paddock and were just sort of biding their time. But we'll get back to that tomorrow. For now, day one, who's your best bet of the day?
My best bet's actually going to be Cliffs of Capri. It was right off the bat, so that's a little bit scary, but I just love the price for a horse who seems to fit impeccably well for this race, and again, very much suited by Ascot, as we've seen in his form lines in the past. So the 22 Cliffs of Capri in race number 1, that'll be my best bet.
And for me, I'm with Liberty Beach. I just love her for the King's Stand Stakes, and I really think that she's got the ability to be able to step up. So for me, I'm hoping that Liberty Beach is able to deliver today. Candice, good luck with day one Royal Ascot. Hopefully we're talking about a bit of a profit tomorrow, and hopefully we can catch up again tomorrow and look ahead to day two.
Ready for it. Let's get started.
Thanks for joining us. Look forward to having your company as well again in the coming days.